All right, let's go a little in-person and virtual round of applause to welcome Sean Amirati to the center stage.
All right, thanks, Adam. So we are, so for those of you I don't know, Sean Amirati, I lead the Corporate Startup Lab here at Carnegie Mellon with Dave Mawhinney, who, for those of you who are in the room can see, is kind of our fearless leader of all these things. So it's great to be here today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Corporate Startup Lab, it's a group that's trying to help large companies act like startups in many ways, but also understand that there are differences between those two worlds and figure out the right way to do transformative innovation. I've had a lot of success doing that over the last 4 or 5 years, and this project that we've been collaborating on with Maad Labs and the whole Schwartz Center team is, to me, like quite exciting on bringing some of these design thinking principles and what's applicable for nonprofits, for small companies, and for big companies. And we did just want to take a moment and acknowledge Sean Brosmith. Like, we would not have been able to do this without his generous support of the program and this entire project. Sean's an alum and really a thought leader in the design space, and also kind of financially made it possible to do this. So Sean, thanks so much for that. With that, I want to actually get to the content itself. It's not, there we go, which is, I'm going to let Adam take it from here, but Adam has led this initiative. Adam, on behalf of CSL and Schwartz, thank you so much for making this happen.
All right, well, round of applause for everybody, because we're standing up here. We made even a few people show up with us in person, and I think this might be the first of the workshops I've seen 6 of the 7 continents represented in the first 30 seconds. So in its own right, we feel really fortunate to be here, and I'll just borrow from some of my co-hosts to kind of keep on letting such a global audience in. My name's Adam Plisick. I'm definitely not the star of today or about this design kit. We're lucky enough to be joined by a panel of experts who you may have also recognized from their celebrity on places like Miro.com, the Miroverse, and YouTube here, talking a little bit about how we can apply the things that we're actually building in not just a UX research mode, but broadly across industries, both big and small, domestic and abroad, and everything ranging from for-profit to nonprofit. The more important star of our show, though, is actually Shipra. And Shipra, give me a second here, because I'm going to put you in center stage. You are no stranger to being a global audience, and I'm going to try to bring your video in a way where we don't totally knock it out. But can everyone give a round of applause for Shipra joining us? So Shipra is part of the team at Miro that she'll certainly tell everybody about. It's the home for our strategic design kit in this first iteration, and it would have not come to fruition had we not had an opportunity to work with the global team here, both in the US and Europe and abroad, to think inclusively and equitably about what we want to design and how we want to support that with all the great folks that are in the expert seats today. So Shipra, did you want to say hello and make sure everybody just knows a little bit about Miro for some of our corporate partners in the audience? And of course, tell us a little bit about what's happening over on your side of the world.
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. I am joining you from San Francisco by way of India and Thailand. I loved seeing all the chat messages. I spent many months in Kiev in Ukraine, Skopje in Macedonia. I work for an Amsterdam-based company, which is Miro, and I run a business where all 10 of my team members are in East Africa and Middle East. So lovely to have a really global audience. I'm a designer. I went to Carnegie Mellon 2 decades ago, so I'm aging myself here. But I'm a designer, and whiteboards really changed my career. You know, I started out just doing design work in a small cubicle and presenting these beautiful prototypes that nobody like really, it didn't connect with people. People didn't want to build all the prototypes that I was building. It missed the mark. To one day that when I just took up, a marker and started writing things on the whiteboard in a meeting. And I was able to distill the conversation that was happening and help the team pick a direction. So that's really defined my career trajectory to where I am now. I'm a facilitator and the evangelist at Miro. And at Miro, we really are working on a product that can bring together geo-distributed, diverse teams together to make decisions and build the next big thing. We have folks from Pfizer and Moderna, that have used Miro to build vaccines, all the way to product design, nonprofits. We have a really wide array of very interesting teams that are building big things on Miro. And they do this by bringing diverse teams together. And by diversity, I don't just mean race and gender, as we generally think about, but diversity in experiences, in seniority, in skills, abilities, perspectives, in the way that Miro, or whiteboards in general, but Miro in particular, does this I think, is allowing a visual space for everyone to express themselves the best way that they can express, or how they want to express themselves in writing or drawing, etc. And so I'm really excited to be here because our biggest strength at Miro is our community and the Miroverse, where Adam is launching today. You're launching some of these, democratizing these amazing frameworks for that allow teams to build and strategize and design and innovate the next big thing. So I've looked at the templates. It's a foundational piece of work that you're open sourcing today, and it's a big step in democratizing the knowledge and ability to innovate beyond people who went to Carnegie Mellon or worked in Silicon Valley or worked at Deloitte. Just opening this up to the whole wide world. I couldn't be more excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, round of applause for Shipra. And again, the whole Miro team, both here and in the Netherlands, that will really help us getting these templates across. At the most foundational level, and Shipra, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of visual reprieve here and move you out of the absolute main stage, but jump in at any time. We can still hear you auditorily. In and around the idea is, it's all about building community. So what we got together and did is took about 1,000 hours of collective work. Thinking about what you're going to hear from these experts today in the early stage venture-backed business model like Chelsea has, right? In the nonprofit and for-profit kind of stretch and tension that Olivia manages at every day. In places like InsurTech and healthcare like Megan wanders around, in defense and military that Rachel is all too familiar with. And of course, poor Alka, who has a degree in every one of these fields, I think so far, is trying to solve these really big systemic problems. But no one of them wanted to spend $150,000 on just building templates, nor will the next 10,000 organizations, no matter where you are, in the same type of work that we're releasing today. So again, in just a few minutes, we're going to kind of release the kit. But in order to warm up and to make sure you all don't fall into atrophy, we're using a tool here called Slido. So for those online, you can either scan this QR code in the top left-hand side, or you can go to slido.com. And I'm asking everybody in our in-person audience as well, the 40 or 50 of you that are here to meet our 40 or 50 online, and try to work on participating and being an active co-creator with us in value. Because if we're going to drink our own champagne, as they say, and release a design thinking kit, we probably need to ask people that are going to use the product about the product. And then we start that with some polling-like questions. So I see that 9 of you have found your way to Slido. I see a couple other participants on the way in. And the ask is really simple. What words or images are top of mind for you today? This, in its root cause, is why we did this kit. It's a way to express and understand the voice of a variety of folks, whether it's written or through visual communication, and ultimately now how to apply that in our journey. So as you can see here, just the act of providing a visual feedback mechanism not only encourages brilliant ideas and creative spectrum to occur much more quickly, but it also creates a dynamic where now your other members of your team or group really want to participate as well, right? Which is at the root cause of why we're releasing something today via Miro. Okay, so we see at least 40 or 45 of you, and growing by the number here, are getting excited about this. I'm not sure where the team or heart or smiley face all comes with, but there's always some creative emojis that come in here. I'm going to subscribe to the up and to the right one today, and the chef kiss robot arm as kind of my pieces here. And namaste to everyone as well, joining from afar. Okay, so now everybody is an active participant. This is in its own right the first step we all bear the burden of when we're trying to create a more inclusive and equitable system, whether you are designing quick serve restaurant menus or patient experiences or nonprofit donor relationships or whatever it might be. It starts with getting people to wake up and be present, which thanks to everybody here, we have certainly done. If only we could get this participation in every class here at CMU, yes. Life would be easy. All right, so with that in mind, let's finally introduce the participants that you have now that all your brains and fingers are warmed up with QR codes and Slido.com polls. So, Megan, you are the furthest from me along our journey. So why don't we and you know my role, it's 90 seconds or less, or else you get the digital hook that pulls you up.
There you go.
Remind everybody a little bit about what you're up to today, what your relationship has been about shaping and designing experience, and if there's any kind of big things that you're excited we might talk about today.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Megan Guidi. I run a company that's based here in Pittsburgh called Open, and I like to describe it as we help our clients do new things. For some of our clients, that's going out to their first customer visit and meeting with people for the first time and planning that and building the internal infrastructure to do that. And others of our clients have already built that infrastructure and they're doing things that we would consider to be really, really innovative. and that's great. And we have a lot of fun all the way along that spectrum teaching people. At the end of the day, what I really think of myself as a facilitator. I love getting people into rooms together to collaborate. Much like Shipper said, whiteboards, I think, changed my career as well. I love a blank whiteboard and a team of people in a room
Or a digital
together.
whiteboard.
Or a digital whiteboard, of course, both whiteboards. And so I'm very excited to be here today talking about these kinds of themes with all of you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Megan. Olivia,
problem.
share a little bit about your perspective and background, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is actually in nonprofits and politics and public administration work, with the idea that, we need to do big things. And a lot of times there's tension in these spaces that if you can have a conversation or if you can reach across the aisle, a lot of great things can get done. But because no one wants to do that, we often hit brick walls when it comes to doing public policy work or doing dynamic things with nonprofits. I think I'm so excited about just design thinking and design strategy because it's been able to help, along with Adam and doing some of the facilitations that we've done, really do some dynamic work with some really big problems. One of the things that we worked on not too long ago was thinking about how do we get more people to donate blood? And most people don't want to donate blood at all, but blood is life-saving. And one person donating blood can save, I think, up to 4 lives. But if you don't get folks to do that, you leave a lot of things on the table. So I'm really excited to be here. I think this is great. I'm so thrilled to be here with all these panelists, and I'm a big fan of Miro, so thank you.
Excellent. Chelsea, please.
All right. Hi, everybody. Chelsea here. I am a graduate from the Integrated Innovation Institute right across the street here at Carnegie Mellon, and the founder and CEO of Viral Moment. We exist to revolutionize the way that people are gathering insights and understanding what's being said on social media. And I started that because I saw a big problem. And I think that's what design thinking is to me. There's a huge problems in the world. You sense them. We know they're there. We see that there's gaps in the way that things are done. But how do we solve those problems? And how do we do it in a way that can be self-sustaining? And design thinking is really what enabled me to be able to do that.
Excellent. Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel DeZombach. I'm an adjunct faculty here at CMU in the School of Computer Science, and I'm also lead our digital transformation efforts at CMU's Software Engineering Institute. I'm an engineer by training. I like to say that up front as I critique engineers here in a second. I have my PhD in engineering from UC Berkeley. I was on the faculty there for many years, and I spent a lot of my career working with engineers, as well as folks who are solution forward. People who say, I have this thing, and sometimes struggle to take a step back and say, who wants it? Right now in my current role working with the military, there's a lot of leaders saying, hey, we want AI. What do we do with, and I have to help them say, well, what do you want to do with the AI? What is the AI? And what outcomes are you trying to achieve? That's not unique to the military or to AI. I've worked across tech, healthcare, construction, and oftentimes it's just really easy to fall in love with a solution, fall in love with a thing. And I feel as though there's a great art and skill to problem framing that is underappreciated. It's why I'm really passionate about the methods we've pulled together here, because they help us to articulate what is that problem we're trying to solve. And at times it lowers the barrier, because sometimes the solution's easier to wrap your brain around than the complexity of the problem itself. So really excited to be here with all of these fantastic panelists and talk about design.
Excellent. Alka, round us out.
Sure, happy to. And I have to say I love engineers because I started out as an engineer and then turned into lawyer. So my background, I really work at the intersection of technical, legal, and business, and have done a number of different things in my career that have actually, I didn't realize it at the time. I was doing design engineering, but it has actually propelled a lot of the impact that I've made. So I was at CMU, worked with the Heinz College at the PwC Center, where we started the center from scratch on solving business problems around cybersecurity, AI, data analytics, and then was at the Defense Department. And on the complementary side of what Rachel was talking about is once the military figured out how they wanted to use AI or what they needed to use AI for, how did we build it responsibly? And then most recently, I'm at Comcast, where I am focusing on how do we bridge the digital divide. And as I think about all of those different pieces, what I've learned is that where this conversation really needs to take place and has a lot of impact is in organizations that are very multidimensional. So multidimensional in terms of have always operated in silos. We've got business lines and business units, and we're in our own little world. But how do we come together and break down those barriers? And then also separately thinking about how do we change the status quo? So we've done business the same way for the last 10 years, or we've always had this process that's been the same process. But we live in a very complex world right now. Our external environment is changing constantly. And so how do we continue to be thinking about these problems in a unique way where we are bringing all voices to the table to think about them in a comprehensive and a holistic manner? So really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for the invitation, Adam. So excited to be up here with a number of female leaders in this space. So definitely a bonus for me.
All right, excellent. Well, this is obviously going to be a slacker panel. I can already tell by the backgrounds. But before we get into the meat of this, and we're happy to distribute this around to everybody, this in its own right is our V0 of our strategic design kit. So the goal was simple. Take the 20 or so most common methods, distill those in a way with examples and perspective and supporting videos that anyone, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, early stage or late stage, high tech or low tech, can take advantage of all of these different methods. And you can get to all of these aggregated in one place via some of the early and late kind of bit.ly links that we'll happily distribute to everybody. This is also your cheat sheet if you want to screen grab this in your moment and ultimately carry it around with you. This is our shortcut to each of the individual methods, thanks to Maddie Love in a very color-coded way. But before we get into each of these methods, my hope is maybe one or two of the panelists could share a little bit about what's their go-to method and what do they use it for. And we started maybe on Megan's side last time, so maybe I'll start with Alka here. And Alka, you and I were talking as recently as today about the power of organizing stakeholders. So, of course, somewhere on our kaleidoscope board here, we have our stakeholder map. Would you mind just giving the quick 20 seconds about what exactly is a map of all your stakeholders? And then how do you actually use it in such an interesting and compounding business like Comcast?
Sure, no, happy to. 20 seconds is a hard ask. Okay, Adam. So I'll talk about it in my current role, right? So we have a number of stakeholders, internal and external. And when we're thinking about internal stakeholders, I've only been with Comcast for about a year. Given how matrixed this organization is, I need to figure out who's doing what and where they sit and how do I engage with them to actually get the outcomes that we need to get from a business perspective. And then from an external perspective, we're working with local government, we're working with state government, we're working with federal government. And so there are many layers to all of those different pieces. And so how do we map out who those stakeholders are on the external side? And so the tool, of course, allows us to think about this from a me perspective of where do I fit in the organization, from a team perspective, from a region perspective, and how do we fit into the big national organization of creating the impact that we're looking at from a business perspective. And the next piece where I think you might be going, Adam, is that once we sort of map this, that lets us determine how do we engage effectively with each of those stakeholders, right? So how I engage, if we just look at the external piece for a second, how I would engage with an external stakeholder at a local level, when I'm talking to local government officials, and Olivia, you know this well, right, is very different than how I would engage with a state official versus a federal official, right? The maturity of understanding of issues, the maturity of understanding of systems and tools is very different. And so having that map is basically the roadmap for how I determine the actions I need to take on a tactical level to obtain the business outcomes I'm looking for.
Really well said. I mean, I like a number of things that you're already pointing out. Additively, this can change over time and can evolve with everyone. But if a VP at a company the size of Comcast, it's in government and around regulations, is actually thinking about stakeholders and how it's going to evolve, imagine the power that you could have, right, in a more dynamic environment. So good to see a foundational artifact. Now, Rachel, you have obviously many favorites. I'm sure as a recovering professor, they're all sort of like your children, but you have just one that you'd like to highlight today that you think everybody should snap to?
Yeah, my go-to method is the abstraction ladder. I think it's one of the hardest methods because it's not how we naturally think, and it forces this articulation of problems. What an abstraction ladder is, if you're not familiar, is whenever you have a problem statement, you first ask yourself, well, why is this problem important? Why do we care about this? Why is this problem worth solving? And if you keep asking those whys, you eventually get to things like because of world peace, because of national security, these big top-level outcomes that, of course, are aspirational and not necessarily super tractable. You also can ladder down and say, what's stopping you from addressing this challenge, surfacing those barriers? And why I love this method is because, one, it helps to see how people see the problem differently on your team at the organizational or regional level that Alka just described. And it also helps introduce the dependencies that exist in a system. Because if you're solving a problem that's worth solving today, it's, as people have said, it's complex. There's a lot of different dimensions to it. And I think just being able to see those different spaces enables a conversation amongst your team to say, well, where should we start with this process? I think it's just a tool that ends up being a superpower in terms of thinking as you're trying to work on a big problem.
Okay, so we've heard an anchor position from, a corporate leader, obviously someone who has to liaise with high tech and large employment through the government. Chelsea, you are on the flip of that, high tech and low employment as a startup.
As it were.
As it works. What kind of experiences ultimately speak to you as far as how to make mess of a constantly evolving landscape? I mean, you live in the middle of TikTok and YouTube Short and a variety of other, not just leading edge, but bleeding edge trends. How do you think about using these tools to kind of keep up with the pace of change?
Oh my gosh, I think so much of my world is spent in what people call the fuzzy front end, or that blurry space where we're like, we know we need to do something. What do we need to do? What do we build? There's a million different options and directions, and it can be really, really overwhelming, especially when you're trying to get consensus with a group. So I love the buy a feature kit very much, because when you actually, it gives you a very hard, fast framework where people have to make a decision quickly and they have to show their priorities right away. And that's easy to do maybe sometimes with one person, but when you're in a group and you need to decide what is our priority, what is important, where do we focus, and how do we cut through this fuzziness, that tool does the trick.
Yeah, excellent. And for those who are a little less familiar with Buy a Feature, this is an exercise, and it comes in a few flavors, where you write down all the potential investments you could make in a service or a product service system. And then you give someone a scarcity budget against those features. So they don't have enough money or time or capability to buy them all, and they organically filter and sort them to the top. So I would imagine that is a weekly experience sometimes in an early stage startup, but thank you, Chelsea, for highlighting. Olivia, now you have such a unique, we'll forgive your political background, we'll focus on the for-profit and nonprofit world, but not only do you have to use probably all of these tools in different situations, but which one comes to mind as a go-to when you're dealing with a really broad range of, let's say, digital literacy or a variety of systems issues that are not as simple as redesigning the front page of a microwave, and instead have housing and hunger and a variety of other big topics that come to play?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say, one of my favorites is I really love personas. Like, I think it's dynamic. It's a great way to actually visualize what you're trying to do. And coupling that with, I kind of do two at once, using buy a feature at the same time. Because if you have a number of stakeholders in the room, what you'll see with that scarcity mindset or the scarcity budget that you have is that folks will have a wish list, and you give them a certain amount of widgets or whatever, and they'll tell you the 3 things, but 4, 5, and 6 are what they really want, and they want to stretch to try and get those. So it's an opportunity for us, if we have, Alka in the room with a Comcast or a government professional or a philanthropy or a nonprofit, to say, okay, well, you like these and I like these, but I notice we have some commonality here. Can we collaborate? And the big thing for us is thinking about, we want to reduce the amount of duplication, but having that collaboration and that space, that visual space to see that these things also matter to you is really great for us getting to that next stage.
Well, and I love how you're highlighting that these methods are not in isolation or a vacuum, right? And in fact, depending on where you are and diverging on an idea or converging on an idea, maybe there's a cocktail combination here that we need to think about. Megan, what's your favorites if you had one?
Oh, that's a good question. So I, much like Rachel, love abstraction laddering or 5 whys or something along those lines, but I'm going to point at Creative Matrix here down at the bottom of our screen and call that one out. So a lot of times when I'm going into rooms with my clients, we're bringing a diverse group of professionals together to ideate, and some people in the room are a little bit skeptical about the process.
No.
Haven't been a part of these types of things before, aren't sure what the outcome is going to be. And the Creative Matrix is a great tool to use in those types of environments because it helps us to produce a lot of ideas really, really quickly. And so that at the end of a Creative Matrix session, you can stand back and you can say to everyone in the room, how long would it have taken us to come up with 10 times 5 different clusters of ideas if we all sort of did this on our own? But in 20 minutes, in 30 minutes, we've generated 500 new ideas that we can go out and explore, pick a few, maybe start to put some into some testing. That's an amazing, powerful tool to bring people together and have that kind of an outcome that quickly.
Megan, it's such a good point. I mean, oftentimes we default to design thinking and research as purely like a delight or utility trade-off. But in this case, there's an economic driver, right? You create more ideas faster. You create more ideas that potentially have value. You refine those ideas against a combination of people and process and facilities. But as we would expect here, lots and lots of methods. Just wanted to give everyone a quick preview here. And again, we'll follow up with this for everybody who's online and in the audience. Now, let's get to the meat of this for these panelists. And we're going to come back to our ideas along the journey. If I can get a little bit of help from let's see if I can find my way out of all these templates are so exciting, but our big screens make it a little challenging at times to click on all these buttons. All right, so let's bring everybody back to where we were here in and around our assessments. And let's ask ourselves, what's a real question that would change my professional ambition? Is it something that we want to ask the panelists about ways of working? Am I getting stuck, like Megan and I will joke in this first prompt about, everybody runs the opposite direction when I walk in with dry erase markers and Post-it notes and they say, nah, like this isn't, a thing that I do. This is a thing that someone does, right? So if it's not my job, if everyone's job. We obviously have different ways of working that are happening here. So I would kind of reach to everybody in the audience here, and I know we're asking for a bit of a long form prompt, but this is your excuse to actually get these group of experts to respond. What types of questions are you noodling on? Now, Megan, this first one, while everyone is kind of gathering their thoughts and they are playing in their Q&A, why does this come to mind? How do you think about it? I mean, obviously you are more than a researcher. You think a lot about organizational change, which is at the premise of anything that is new and exciting to create value. What are some of your go-to tactics to get the CEO in the room or the CMO, she, he, or they, to actually come out here and say, oh, I get it. We're not just simply going to build out 1,000 ideas.
Right. So the economic value of design thinking, I think a lot of times in the for-profit space is a valuable conversation to have, to talk about how powerful this is. There's, we all know the stats. Design-led organizations outperform the S&P 500 by so much of a percentage. And what I try to convey to folks when they're kind of entering a design thinking space for the first time is that design thinking isn't like a thing we do. We go to a design thinking meeting and then we stop doing design thinking and we go enter things into a computer, right? Design thinking really needs to be our orientation. It needs to be the lens through which we view the world. And I feel really strongly about that, right? That we're able to kind of approach our work by asking questions about it, by wondering, are we really solving the right problem? When we're kind of working together like that, I think we get to the point where, optimistically, I envision that we'll get to the point where people don't feel like, oh, I had to go to that design thinking meeting, right? That this just becomes the way that we work together.
Interestingly enough, Rachel, I have a question for you on this second bullet point. So we all know that we are less and less in person. Even the military and other people have to work in different ways remotely, but not everybody comes, I know this will shock and awe Shipra, with a deep understanding about how to really take advantage of a digital whiteboard. In fact, I can tell you very quantifiably that about 22 and a half minutes is how long it takes digitally native people for the first time to ramp in for what's going on. You have any early thoughts about how do you take a private in the military or someone who has less focused themselves on kind of digital literacy and technology, in this specific case around something as complex as AI and ML, and bring them into this world? Do you start analog and go digital? Do you just jump right in? Is it self-serve, cohort-based? What are the kind of tools and tricks?
Yeah, so having done a lot of this and gotten a lot of military folks, as well as other folks who are not typically spending their days on Miro or Google Slides to engage, I think the biggest thing is really establishing confidence. Because for those of us who live in our computers, live in this world, it's very second nature, and we forget how intimidating it actually is to engage in these spaces. And there's often also a degree of arrogance to us at times of oh, you don't use Miro, weird, and we have to break that barrier down, recognizing that these tools are built for collaboration. It's about there's a playfulness to them, there's an accessibility to them. And I think if you can get over that initial activation energy, one thing I use in all of my classes is just kind of a fun activity. I don't call them icebreakers. Just they're more of check-ins to get the people to engage somehow, put something out there. The intention of Adam saying, hey, I'll steal your secrets, saying, where are you from? that's an easy softball question to get people to start engaging in the chat. And the more we can do that in these digital tools, it lowers that activation energy that's needed for folks to engage and shows them, there's no magic here, but there's skills that you can gain over time. It's not necessarily true that the person who is very tech literate is going to be the most successful. And certainly, I think also having use cases. For me, once I taught, folks from the Department of Labor who are really not familiar with digital tools, and they were successfully using Miro, it was much easier to say to my fighter pilots, hey, those folks over there were able to do this, so I can believe the same thing is possible for you too.
That's right. So Olivia, I'd love your weigh in on this question as well. We have been in some interesting facilitations and journeys trying to solve some pretty big systemic problems. We could argue that donation of love is a big issue. I think in Southwestern PA, I think it's $20+ million we spend as a region just bringing in blood from other places. So that tells you, even in Hospital City, as we are known for those abroad, kind of where we are. But how do you start to think about bringing those that may not even own more than a smartphone, if that, into the realm on this? I mean, are they not included? Do we not care about their voice? Like, how do we start to activate people that wouldn't set up the Miro account or share the board or facilitate in the front?
Yeah, so I think that's a really great question because, I sometimes take the perspective of like everybody's on a computer, everybody has a smartphone, and that's just not true. There's a number of folks out there that don't use computers, don't have access to internet, depending on where you're living. And the idea is that you have to go a little bit further, and you have to really maybe spend some time almost in a pre-session or a pre-meeting, making sure that you're dedicating time to getting these folks up to at least speed. What we've done really successfully, and there's some folks that really did value this when we were working with them, is dedicate some staff time and individually working with folks and being that check-in on the side to make sure that they're not jumping in the chat, they're not turning off their screen and not participating digitally. And in person, I think it's been really important to really make sure, Adam yells at me about this, but calling on people and making sure it's not just the COOs or the CEOs taking up all the space and the air in the room, and really giving a platform to those folks that are living this daily in some cases, may need the blood donation, may have survived because of blood donation, and making sure that they're participating as well.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit. So Chelsea, this funny next question I think is really articulate from someone in the audience. I might have scrolled up at this point, but they said basically like, hey, we come together and we do a design workshop and it's a destination. And then we think in 2 months from now, we'll come back together and do another workshop. And then in between that, there's not 25% of the energy and effort going on, it's like 0%. So we turn the volume all the way down. Chelsea, you and I talk about this a lot because you move at the speed of startup and venture, right? You are at the bleeding edge of both machine vision and new media when it comes to TikTok. So what you think about delivering insights to an agency or a brand partner 30 days ago is probably not the same dynamics that we're working with, 70 days from now or in the middle of the holiday season. How do you get your head of customer success and your CTO and your product leader to think of this as a weekly, if not daily ritual, and not something that we use only when we want to see whose fault it is or who actually signed up to be accountable?
Yeah, good question. Because you can definitely go to a session and everyone walks away and nothing happens. Or like there's one hard driver that goes and builds the damn thing. But it's so powerful. I think what you were saying earlier, Megan, that this isn't just a workshop. It's not something you do on a whiteboard. It's a frame of mind. And it changes the way that you think and the way that you approach problems. What I think everyone should take away from design thinking is I have a system that enables me to solve a specific problem for a specific group that's very painful. So it's not a whiteboard session. The whiteboard influences you to behave and understand the world in a set of ways. And that's where the power really becomes alive with all of this. So if this is a session that you do with someone and then you walk away, that's not the right use. This needs to be transformational for how you think about solving problems for your users.
So I'll give you a few tactical hacks here as well, because oftentimes we don't always just share exactly what we do in the day-to-day. So for me, I will not have what they call a stand down, which is very similar to a stand up at a different window, if we're not looking at the same stakeholder map, for instance. And a lot of what we think about, and this is also important, and it happens in a single text box, is like, when was the last date this was updated? And I don't allow everyone to just iterate in the exact same canvas or module. I make them copy and paste the stakeholder map. So then how can I go out and we're trying to argue for better connectivity in Southwestern Pennsylvania or more digital literacy? we say, hey, 3 months ago, we thought this was our stakeholder map. Let's copy and paste this and work from the new one. And now not only am I reinforcing the behavior that you are valued because of the breadth and depth in work here, but that you actually can see your work changing over time. And frankly, everybody else can see if it's not changing, to Chelsea's point.
And it's so powerful when you do return to it and you're like, oh, we were right about these things and all this has now changed.
That's right. I'll go to you, Mad.
Well, I wanted to double down just on those comments, right? And I'm going to go back for a quick second too, because I think Megan, you said orientation, Chelsea, you said frame of mind. I say business culture, right?
Yes,
like we're all talking
yes.
about the same thing, right? And how do we shift that? But to your latest question, Adam, I'm going to put on my government affairs hat for a quick second, which actually is on almost all the time. But you know, if you're paying attention to what's happening at the federal level, the Biden administration is coming out with so much, so fast, so quickly, right? And so when you talk about doing this on a daily basis, you almost have to keep on top of what are our processes, how are we going to solve these problems, how are we going to get to all this, because the external environment is changing on an external basis. So I think this does become corporate culture, business culture, to get to what we're trying to solve for.
Really well said. Megan, I have one last question for you, and then we're going to take a different prompt.
Yeah.
So we go in and we create 1,000 canvases and maps, right? And so, you know, every big company says, oh, let's, you know, they get one taste of a stakeholder map and now we have 300, or we have one storyboard and now we have one every 3 weeks as, you know, the weather changes or the season shifts. But how do we organize this stuff so that it doesn't amass, as someone pointed out really articulately, in a sort of drawer full of apps type of dynamic that we can't really manage or find or search or discover?
Yeah, I think that is where there's a lot of power in the digital collaboration tools, that you can do things with these tools like search for a word, right? There's some just basics. It's going to sound silly when I say these things, but like someone has to own it, right? After the meeting, someone has to be the champion that's carrying it forward, that's thinking about it, that's asking people to come in, again, collaboration space, come in asynchronously and add to it or move things around. You went out and had a conversation with customers, awesome. Get back in that board and put your thoughts there, right? Someone has to actually be the, I use the example, if you've ever been trained in CPR, the first step in an emergency is to point to someone and say, you, call 911. Why is that? It's because if you just say, call 911, no one does it, right? So someone has to be the person that's like, I'm in charge of this board. I'm in charge of this thing. And that they're the champion for it and they're carrying it. They pull that thread between those meetings for everyone.
Okay, but Megan, I got a question for you and the broader group, because, you know, as a chief revenue officer in my past life, you know, we used to use something called a customer relationship management tool, or CRM.
Yeah.
And it was how everyone got paid. It was the central hive mind of the business. It was easier to get people to walk between the East and the West Coast of the US than it was to get them to consistently enter in material information that would pay for compensation. So for those of us on the rest of the room, how do we motivate people to do it? And the reason I'm prompting this is in the background, everyone should be dialing in. For those in the room, please scan the QR code and jump in. These are challenges, right, that we're going to see. And the first challenge is getting people to agree they're willing to change, they're willing to use something. You know, the chief legal officer may not feel they need a digital whiteboard, right? Someone who's been a lead software developer may not feel like doing data diagrams just so designers or marketing managers can see it. So how do we get people to be receptive to change and be vulnerable? And I'm going to start with you actually on this one while Megan kind of warms up, because, you know, Comcast, for all of its, you know, backpan and infrastructure, you know, I wouldn't say necessarily is a de facto Miro first culture. Fair enough?
Yeah, but I will say, though, with COVID and thinking about how global our organization is, that digital whiteboard aspect is critical for us to innovate, right? This is how we collaborate. This is how we innovate. We need something. I can't do stickies, you know, when my team's on the other part of the state and half of my team's here, right?
Or the world, right?
Or the world, right? So across the nation, across the world. So I think it's absolutely critical. The other thing I'll just say, too, is, you know, I have this little board in my office that says strive for progress, not perfection. And I think with this, right, as we think about how do we create muscle memory within organizations, it's about progress. It's a baby step, right? Just go to the website first, play around with one template. And then, you know, I think the ownership piece is absolutely critical. Not everyone has to be 100% of an expert. If I had one Megan in my organization, then we can talk about how we do train the trainer and scale that. And that's how you build that culture. And so I think there's a lot of different components to this. And as long as you decrease the barrier to change, and as we think about how we innovate, that will just increase in terms of adoption.
Okay, Chelsea, I'm going to pick on you for this one because it's one of the bigger words, and I'm going to kind of hopscotch around. So time is at the center of this map, both literally and metaphorically for everyone. It is our obvious, and hard constraint. But the thing you definitely have the least of in general, but especially in an early stage business. So how do you teach your CTO to value this time versus a code review, or coming in and doing a roadmap, or doing customer discovery outside in? Why is it worth the investment?
Yeah, I think the best approach is when you have rigor and schedule to this type of things. And we have a routine. It's like a hygiene around our meetings. We do have our daily stand-up where we look at our boards. We check in on our roadmap once a week. We do a stakeholder just check in occasionally and just say, who are we targeting now? Is it shifting? Are we changing? So there's a cadence and a schedule. And if you can get organizational buy-in, which is really easy with a team of 6, like we have at Viral Moment, that becomes part of your routine. And that way it's just ingrained in everyone's brain. Oh yeah, today we're gonna do a roadmap review and we're gonna refresh on what all the stakeholders' needs are.
All right, but Olivia, sometimes you work in a distributed network of people that you certainly employ, but also influence. There's a buy-in concept which I think can be captured if we were to collapse in a round, including our glorious half-assed commitment. The idea is, how do we think about getting people that they default position is, this is not my job?
I think that's an interesting question, right? Because in nonprofits sometimes, or even in philanthropy, you have folks that want to do everything but have trouble doing one thing well. And that's okay. You grow through that. But we had to make this, we had to look at this as a living system, honestly, and say that, we can't just leave these things and come back to them, as folks have mentioned, but it has to be something that's almost ingrained in what we do. And then at the same time, this has to be a point for reflection and saying, we didn't do what we were going to do 3 months ago. There's no buy-in from this. How do we flip and change and really reevaluate our position in this work? And that's so important because I think, during COVID, philanthropy really stepped up in different ways to influence and help our nonprofit partners. But nonprofits also did a lot of really great work. And we got to this point where it was what are we doing now? And it came back to, if we have these systems and we have these structures and we have this place, this is something that if we continue doing, this will only help us prepare for the next thing that comes down the pike. So it was just incredibly valuable to us.
Well said. Now, Rachel, I'm going to put you on the spot for this last one because it's a little bit of a combo, but you are a good complex multitasker. So there's buy-in and give up control. Olivia already kind of highlighted this piece, but buy-in is an interesting thing that we want everyone else to do. Giving up control is what we probably need to do in this kind of pot looking at kettle moment.
Totally.
How do you give up control as the person with literally a doctorate in the topic we're studying, but not necessarily a document in field operations along the way? So how would you coach everybody here that by definition of being here is at least going to be slightly more informed than the average person about strategic design? What kinds of tools do you say when you need to release?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 pieces here on the buy-in as well as the lack of control. At the end of the day, you are trying, when deploying these methods in an organization, you're trying to drive new behaviors and learning. And I think at times the control in us gets lost. We say, oh, you're not doing personas the way that you should be, and it doesn't look like my definition of a persona.
I like the voice for that.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
universal to all facilitators.
That's my cringe moment. And I think that's the times where certainly, if you have, as a facilitator, have to step back and say, okay, if I want you to do better on personas, what structure am I providing? What coaching am I providing? We at times lose sight of that where we want to support the customer, but we forget to be customer-centric, we forget to be employee-centric and giving employees the support that they need to actually adopt these pieces. At the same time, as a leader, I have to be willing and be vulnerable to put things out there, to have that uncomfortable meeting. I've certainly sat in a room with military generals rolling out the Post-its, gotten the eye rolls, and saying, you know what, I'm going to just ignore this and roll forward, which ends up leading to them walking away saying, wow, that was the best meeting ever because Rachel facilitated it. But they were originally super skeptical because of the Post-its, because of these artifacts that are inherently unfamiliar to them. So I think it's not losing sight of the purpose piece of it. And to Chelsea's point, really bringing that rigor and structure to the conversation as well, because again, the structure is what enables the behaviors that we want to see.
So I want everyone to kind of look at this slide for half a second and realize that this is also a great screen grab moment, right? This in our own drinking the champagne experience can be the starting position that you use our very own strategic design kit to solve against. But what's exciting here is that when you consolidate and cluster, pun intended, some of these themes, right, it probably comes down to only 5 or 10 major blockers, big blockers, all the same, but only 5 or 10 to move us along.
You know, Adam, I think going back to that screen, if we can for just
Please.
1 minute, I tend to think about myself as a researcher anytime I go into conversation with
Great
other
point.
people, right? And so like when I look at this slide, what a fascinating research artifact that we've just created to sort of point at some of the challenges of using this system. If I were in a workshop and seeing these challenges come up or having in a process where people weren't carrying things through, people didn't seem to have an appetite for it, I need to think about that as data, as like important information that I can use to better understand my organization. Gosh, what are people motivated by here? And how can I infuse some of that motivation into this process so that people are seeing the outcomes that are gonna jazz them up for it? Like with Rachel's generals, like having an effective meeting was probably a big motivator for them and may have like turned them a little bit.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent, excellent dialogue. Okay, we only have one last prompt, and I promise we're going to let everybody get on with their evening, their lunch, their happy hour, wherever you are in the world, as they say. So the last big question here is, what's been a tangible way that something around strategic design, which is more systems focused, versus human-centered design or user-centered design, depending on the synonyms and analogies we want to build, has done to tangibly increase your career? So the example that Shawnee Maradi and I talked about in the beginning is we noticed that there was a trend in an article written that just when design thinking you could demonstrate it as a marketing manager, your compensation was 25% more than everybody else who couldn't do this type of sensing and learning around complex problems, even though they thought of themselves as someone who was executing against advertising or media or a variety of kind of methods around communicating with a commercial intent. So if we think about this, we're already seeing somebody from our group, and thank you for dropping it in, is, it changes your personal brand. Has anyone experienced this on the panel while a few others start to seat us with a couple of dialogues?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I can think of very early in my career, before all these wonderful digital tools existed, walking into a room with a group of people and a blank whiteboard and a whiteboard marker as your only tools, right? Whoever kind of ran up and grabbed that marker had the power in the room. And that was actually like a really important learning for me. Like if I can be the one that leads this group with these two tools, like I can actually move things forward. It can be me. And so for me, I think that would be my answer to this question. Like it really kind of pushed me into a leadership role.
So Ovretta Sampson, who works at Cap One, has this really important frame, I think, around superficial empathy versus deep empathy. And I see empathy and kind of sensing and feeling in different words in here. Has anyone explored this idea of, we understand, we can relate and sympathize, but has anyone seen the design thinking tools take them deeper or down a rabbit hole, maybe with a population or a use case or a problem that would otherwise not have been something you would have explored or been able to explore in the same way?
So I'll throw out one,
Yeah.
and just sort of piggyback to off of your last question and bring it into this one. So I think, as an engineer, in early years of my career, I was a problem solver, right? Like you solve problems, we solve problems. And now, using tools such as these and thinking, really utilizing design thinking and systems engineering thinking, it's more of my brand is I'm an impact driver. I'm driving impact, right? So I'm not just solving problems, but I'm driving impact. So to your specific question you just asked now, Adam, when we're focused at Comcast around digital equity and how do we bridge the digital divide, I think people automatically go to, well, especially when you think about rural areas, just go get them connectivity and that will solve the problem. And so when I came in, I'm like, okay, let's just build out our structure, our infrastructure out to these rural areas. And what I realized is like, that's not the problem. The problem is how are we looking at this holistically? How are we thinking about this in terms of access to telehealth? How are we thinking about this in terms of access to workforce development and workforce engagement? How are we thinking about this in terms of education? And so we're looking at this problem very differently in terms of a holistic manner. It's not just about access, it's about all of these other pieces that drive economic mobility for our communities. And so really to go to where you're going, the problem isn't really what you thought it was. The problem is all this other stuff. And if we can solve for all of these other things, sure, right? Like this is how we make impact. This is how we build our communities and make them better. And so, it's not always where you think you're going to start. It's really, it really opens up and pulls back the currents to really what the problems are.
So Olivia, you've been working in a very, very broad range. I want to say the Greater Pittsburgh Nonprofit Partnership is 2,000 plus nonprofits, give or take?
Yeah.
Give or take, yeah. So you're like just a few.
Yeah.
So all of these people have slightly different problems. Some people don't know how to communicate about their message. Some people need to reinvent themselves in a digital world. Some people have been completely disrupted by this pandemic, ongoing /finished who knows how to describe it, dilemma we're in. And there's some prompts in here about knowing some tools that can pair with some situations. Have you found that there's a bit of a system that you're developing? Is that making it easier for nonprofits to come to you? Maybe talk to us a little bit about the power of having tools in an organized way and knowing when and where to use them.
Yeah, so I think, having tools or a toolkit in an organized way is fantastic. Like, it's great, right? Because nonprofits exist kind of across the spectrum. Most folks are doing one thing when they want to do another thing, and they're doing mission creep to chase money. What happens is that I think having, being a facilitator and having, and how this has really helped me, is that I'm okay with existing in the complexity, right? Like, I'm okay with being in the tension, and that's been really powerful to work with nonprofits specifically around those that might have to close their doors next year or have closed their doors recently and they didn't think they'd need to and they never planned for it. And we talk about digital literacy and access to digital tools. There were folks that during the beginning of the pandemic were hardwired folks, like they were using filing cabinets. And when everything shut down in March, they had no way to access their office, no way to access their tools. So just being able to sit in this place and being okay with the complexity and the tension and being able to work with nonprofits in that way and come as a funder who's not necessarily going to give them all the money, but I'm going to give them something more valuable that they can grow with and learn with, and this tool and the tools that are available here has been really powerful to helping reimagine kind of how nonprofits do our work.
Okay, so believe it or not, we've actually already barreled through our full hour here along our journey. And we've had over 250 interactive responses, which is always something we are particularly grateful for along our way. So I'm gonna buy the panelists just another 30 seconds to think about the final words of wisdom they wanna have us with along this journey. I have included everyone's LinkedIn QR code here for those that are trying to make these amazing connections with Megan, Olivia, Chelsea, Rachel, and Alka along their journey, whether it's today or tomorrow. And, Sean and Marty, if you want to come up here and hang out with me again, we're going to kind of wrap everybody up here. But before we do that, while everyone's thinking about why and how they're going to get this kit, follow along this CMU and related journey. And then I am lovingly putting my information out here to be your triage point if you are in person or remote to find you the right corporate partner at CMU or digital partner broadly. But with that in mind, Megan, can we get the 20-second takeaway while everybody kind of wraps up?
Yeah, so with all of these tools, there are some videos that you'll see, some faces that you might recognize from the stage. And I think in a lot of the videos we wrap by saying, make it your own. And what I really want people to understand is that these aren't like hard and fast. Rachel mentioned this before, you have to do it this way. We give you these as structures upon which to hang your challenge. And if you need to rebuild the structure or reorient the structure a little bit to fit your challenge, please do that. These are your tools. Make them what you need them to be in order to make your work more efficient, more impactful, more fun for everyone involved.
Really well said, Megan. And a reminder that you can do that by scanning in this room or in the follow-up or online to get the kit. Olivia, what was your big takeaway or coaching moment for everybody else?
Yeah, so I'd say with this, step one for me would be just explore. Take a chance on some of these. Some of them may not seem completely relevant to what you're doing, but at some point in one time, it'll definitely stand out and be something that you want to use. Two, I'd say look for other folks that are thinking this way, kind of build the group, build that community.
For instance, the 150 people that joined us today.
Absolutely, connect with at least one of them. And I'd say the third thing here is that, sometimes the problems and the solutions exist in that complexity. Be okay with tackling that and be okay with not having a yes answer immediately. Be a both and person on either or.
Powerful punctuation. Chelsea.
All right. We're living in so much ambiguity, and it can be so intimidating and scary to jump in or enable and empower your team to jump in. We sit here and we're like, okay, there's a million problems I want to solve. What even is the big problem? Who's doing it? The world is crazy. And I know everyone here is a mover and a shaker, else you wouldn't be here. So I encourage you to believe in the flow of these things. Like, just start. Jump in, use a couple of these tools. It's like jumping in a river. There's some pull. And as you work through things, you'll find clarity and you'll find paths to doing and creating and making progress.
Well said, Chelsea. Rachel, please.
My thought is that nobody hangs out at a panel on Thursday afternoon unless they're interested in learning. And everybody here is interested in learning in some way, shape, or form. All of these methods are ways to augment your learning, ways to see the world, see the problems, your teammates, yourself in new ways. You don't always need to do a full abstraction ladder, but once you've engaged in that method enough, you can start just whipping out in a meeting the questions of, well, why do we care about this problem and what's stopping you? I think that's the beauty of these methods. They help you skill build so that you can use them more fluently and build that perspective that you are bringing to every conversation, every problem that you're working on.
Excellent. Alka, take us home.
So much pressure. Okay, so a couple things. One is, we talk about creating inclusive systems. I can't say how important these types of tools are for allowing inclusive thoughts and inclusive cultures and inclusive people, right? So not all of us are extroverts, some of us are introverts, and so these kind of tools are really important for inclusive input. The other piece I will say is psychological safety, creating those safe spaces. You talked about this, Rachel, but how do we create psychological safety? And this is corporate speak, I apologize. But when we think about in our institutions, in corporations, we don't want to fail, right? Failure is bad. But how do we create this safe environment to allow people to explore and know that it's okay to fail? The other last two quick things is I would say, it's important to create muscle memory around this. And finally, progress, not perfection.
Well, so round of applause for these amazing panelists. I'm here, Brian. Sean, I'm going to make you sit in the middle of the area here so you can be directly underneath the thank you sign, which is the most important message for those that have been.
And just one note on the kit, too. That all the stuff in the kit is licensed under Creative Commons. Yeah. So this is not please buy our tool. This is these are free to use, pick up and run.
Right.
And most importantly, from our perspective, because we've done other things under Creative Commons before as well, it allows you to tweak it and then share back with us how you've adjusted these tools, which is actually, being a research university at the end of the day, the thing we care about, right? We want to know, how are you using these things and making them better?
Yep.
Well said. Okay. Thank you for everybody who is virtual or online. We're going to stop our recording now and unfortunately say adieu to those online because we have an autonomous vehicle summit about to descend upon us here at Carnegie Mellon. Thank you for coming. Thank you everybody online. On behalf of CSL, Shipra, thank you so much for sticking around and joining us on the Miro adventure. See everybody soon. Cheers.